Hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to episode number 49 of the Indian Av Geek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Today on the podcast, we have a man who's been breathing aviation for over 25 years and has quite literally witnessed the industry's most dramatic turbulence, bankruptcies, and soaring comebacks from the first row. Meet Jay Shabat. Before swapping spreadsheets for storytelling, Jay cut his teeth as a senior revenue management analyst at US Airways. He then hopped across the pond to Air France's pricing desks, teaching ticket calculators a thing or two about corporate economics. He was crunching numbers on pricing and demand forecasting when online travel agencies were barely taking off. But here's where it gets interesting. Jay did not just watch the aviation world from the sidelines. He did absolutely something brilliant in 2004. He co-founded Airline Weekly, one of the industry's most respected publications, with absolutely zero journalism experience. Talk about a leap of faith that paid off spectacularly. What started off as a passionate fascination with airlines in his college library? Yes, he actually spent his Friday and Saturday evenings reading every back issue of the air transport world dating back to 1960s. That evolved into the definitive voice that airline CEOs and senior executives turn to for insights. And today, we have him on the show. Welcome to the Indian Av Geek, Jay.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's start how it all began. What led you to your interest in aviation, Jay?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what did not lead me into aviation. I think you'll hear a lot of stories among aviation people about how, my mom and dad and uncle and grandpa and cousin were all pilots and mechanics. And, from when I was 2 months old, I knew I wanted to be in the airline business. That's not my story at all. I have no relatives, I never really even thought about the airline industry until I was in college. And just by happenstance, I came across a really good book about the industry. It was called Hard Landing. And it's a little bit old, older now. So, we're going back. It's probably written in the 1990s, maybe. So, but I still recommend it. It's a really good book. And yeah, that just really triggered my interest. I was like, wow, this industry is it. The book talks about how the industry evolved after the US industry in particular, after deregulation in the late 70s. So, how all these airlines managed it. And there was just a lot of drama and, it was just great stories. So I was like, wow, this industry is really cool. So I kind of knew someone who knew someone at that time in college that was working for US Airways, which eventually became American. This was in the late 90s. And I was able to get an internship in the marketing department. So I worked there as an intern for a year, and they didn't pay me any money, but they paid me in free airline tickets, which was totally fine. No, I was very happy with that. So I afterwards was pretty relatively easily able to get a job with US Airways. I worked in the revenue management department for a couple of years. I moved over to Air France in New York City for a couple of years, went back to graduate school, and then started Airline Weekly in 2004, so 21 years ago. Makes me feel very old, but here I am still going. And Airline Weekly today is owned by Skift, as you know, and Skift is a company that covers all aspects of travel, including aviation, but not certainly not limited to aviation. And yeah, that's my story. And the only other thing I should probably say, if I may, is that I did co-author a book with my old colleague Seth Kaplan called Glory, Lost and Found, and it's a history of Delta Airlines. So if anybody's interested in that topic, I think you'll find that a good read.
Glory lost and found, how Delta climbed from despair to dominance in the post 9/11 era. That is by Jay and Seth Kaplan. It's on Amazon. Interestingly enough, when I checked that out on Amazon, one of the other books next in the recommendation list is in fact Hard Landing. Great company indeed. You started as a revenue analyst at US Airways before moving on to Air France as a pricing analyst. How are these roles important for your deep interest in airline economics and even teaching that for IATA?
Yeah, that's correct. So I did that. That IATA would hire me periodically to go to different airlines or aviation entities and around the world. Really, I had some really amazing experiences, and to teach different courses. Introduction to airline economics, things like that. And yeah, a lot of what I learned came from my initial jobs working with both US Airways and Air France. So yeah, that was all essential to my understanding of the industry, learning how it all works. People told me, and for any young people listening who are thinking about aviation career, people would tell me when I was interning at US Airways that revenue management is a really good place to learn the industry. You kind of learn you learn the markets, you learn how tickets are priced, you learn so. I found that to be true. It was very helpful to kind of understand how the business works.
Any lessons from that time that you still hold close?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I think there's no substitute for just really learning the basics of the industry. Whatever it is you do, if you're anything from revenue management to fleet planning or whatever or even in a customer service role, whatever it is, to just learn as much as you can. You'd be surprised, like how much stuff that you don't think is important when you're 22 years old that winds up becoming, relevant when you're 52 years old. So it's just, yeah, uh, I'm not imparting any brilliant wisdom here, but I would definitely, encourage anybody who's, young people who are listening to this to just learn as much as you can, talk to as many people as you can. Um, Industry events are really great for learning about the industry. Nowadays, when I was starting, there really wasn't that much available in terms of, being able to go on YouTube and just, watching videos from airline CEOs and or listening to airline earnings calls. Now there's just so much information. And, probably the hardest thing about mastering a subject these days is just knowing how to sift the good information from the bad, prioritizing what you should spend your time in because there's so much information out there. So not an easy thing to do, but that's a goal.
Jay, I was recently going through a report that you co authored, Halftime Airline Report 2025. It highlighted strong global demand in the first half, factual indeed. I wanted to understand from you what were the key factors which drove this growth and which regions are leading.
Yeah, so I would say things haven't really changed all that much since that article you referred to was published back in, I guess, early July, maybe late June, and we're approaching September here, a couple days away from September. And yeah, pretty much the same. If I had to give the elevator pitch, just the very simple overview of what's going on in the airline industry today, I would say that demand is still pretty good. I would say that supply is still very constrained. And then I would say two things are happening with prices or cost, let's say costs. So the costs of fuel, which is 20, 30, 40% of an airline's cost, depending on, that'll vary across different airlines. Fuel costs have gone down, but pretty much every other cost have gone up. So demand strong, supply constrained, cost mixed. That's kind of the elevator pitch of what's going on. That's going to differ a little bit by, this region versus that region. But for the most part, I think what I just said applies globally. Yeah. And then we can, happy that you could ask me about different regions if you want, but I think there are certain regions. It's kind of interesting to look at what the airline industry looks like today versus pre-COVID. So we're now about 6 years, 6 years ahead of that. So we're getting, it's not like it happened yesterday. But there are some markets, some airports, some countries that are a lot larger today than they were 6 years ago. And then there are some that are quite a bit smaller. So I'll give you a couple, just examples. So like India, where you are, Vishal, is a good example of a market that's much larger today. There's been a lot of growth there, a lot of new aircraft coming in. So yeah, good example. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Vietnam. even Colombia in South America. There are a few that kind of stand out. But then on the other side of the coin, a market like Germany, much smaller today, or let's say significantly smaller today than it was in 2019. Um, some of the Asian markets haven't fully recovered, like Hong Kong would be another example. Trying to think of a few others. I think Indonesia is one that hasn't recovered. Thailand is kind of interesting. Thailand has fared reasonably well, but a lot of their biggest source of tourism is just from China, and that Chinese tourism hasn't come back
China
yet.
and India.
Yeah, and
Last
India is starting to
year,
grow very
I
fast.
think last year they had
Mhm.
more than 2 million Indian tourists. Thailand.
Yeah, yeah, growing fast. And the India picture for Thailand is actually kind of a happy story, like it's just growing, growing, whereas they've had a lot of trouble kind of matching their pre-COVID levels of Chinese tourism. And there's different reasons for that. There's some
Yeah,
there,
geopolitical and so on and so forth. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right. On a similar note, premium cabins saw record momentum in 2024. Do you expect business and first class travel growth to continue this year and the next? Or do you think we are nearing a plateau?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, a lot's going to depend on the economy and how the global economy pans out. And of course, nobody can know for sure. I'll say a few things, let's say a few factors or forces that have lifted premium demand that you might call sticky, that might not be going away anytime soon. And one of them is just simply that there's in a lot of countries in the world, whether it be United States, many countries in Europe, even many countries of Northeast Asia, um, there is just a large pool of retirees, people with quite a bit of savings, people with plenty of time, and they're traveling. They want to go in style. They want to maybe not style, but they want to go in comfort. And so with that segment of the population, premium has become rather popular, and that's not changing. I mean that demographic is going to be there. So that's one thing that I think airlines will find helpful to supporting premium demand. There are other factors too. I think airlines have learned to price their premium seats better, more dynamically. And I can give you a personal example of this. My wife recently was traveling from New York to Tokyo, and she in economy class, but just like a day or two before, she got, an email from the airline. Do you want to upgrade to business class? And the price was just, much, much, much cheaper than if she had originally booked it. And she did it. She said, "Yeah, let's do it. We'll do one-way business class." So I think you see more of that, and that's not always, maybe the yields, what the airline's
So the
receiving
revenue
is
management is much more stronger, and
is is
maybe
much
maybe there
stronger.
is also some aspect of AI coming in there, Jay, in terms of assisting airlines and the revenue teams in helping out what can be upsold maybe more efficiently. Which airline was it, if I may ask?
It was United. Yeah. So yeah, I mean AI, I think we're pretty hard to say, but I think we're very much in the early innings with AI. I don't know how much of an impact it's having yet. I mean, if you think of just very dynamic, what am I trying to say? Like in terms of processing large amounts of information using, sophisticated networks and algorithms and forecasting, that's something that airlines are pretty far advanced. I mean, when I was at US Airways back in 1998, we had already started using like neural network based revenue management. So it's not new. Now, will some of these, just much more sophisticated, models that are coming out from just whatever from Silicon Valley and whatever. Is that going to take it to the next level? Maybe, but I don't think we're there yet. I should add that it's actually pretty controversial, or can be. Um, and my colleagues Megna and Gordon at Skift have written about some about this, where people are sometimes a little bit uncomfortable, like, oh wait, you're charging me more because you know everything about my personal life, and you know that I'm traveling to for a funeral or whatever, and you're going to charge. So there's some aspects like that are controversial. So yeah, I think AI though at this point, I mean AI in general is more is it's more of a talking point. It hasn't. really change the airline industry in fundamental ways, at least not yet. And I stand ready to be, disproven in the near future, maybe the not so near future, but as of right now, not yet.
Right. The other thing we keep hearing about is consolidation and alliances in the industry or impending news of it. What's your take on the future of airline partnerships and where might breakups or new joint ventures emerge? If you look at the European market, there is chatter around Air Europa, there is still chatter around TAP, there is chatter around alliance exits and entries. What's your perspective on all this, Jay?
Yeah, good question. Consolidation is always a hot and exciting topic, and it's something that's
Yeah, and,
it's,
and and of course
Mhm.
in the American market, I'm sorry, but lots of chatter around Spirit.
Yeah, very much so. Whether or not they'd even survive at this point. So that's kind of a big question mark hanging over them and the entire US, domestic airline industry. Yeah, I mean, consolidation is something that's been happening really since just very early days, especially post deregulation. Lots of mergers. If you look at the US, there have been five or six real big ones, starting in, I guess you can a good starting point would be in 2005, so 20 years ago, when US Airways and when America West, which was a low-cost carrier, purchased US Airways at a bankruptcy. And then you had a bunch of, very big subsequent mergers, Delta Northwest, United Continental, and American US Airways. You can go on. Most recent one we had was Alaska Hawaiian, most recent big one. Another small one between regionals, Republic and Mesa, and probably too detailed for a global audience. But yeah, I just think, particularly in the U.S., I think this is also true of Europe too, is that a lot of these mergers have proven very successful. I mean, if you look at pretty much all of those mergers that I mentioned in the U.S., and then if you talk about, Air France and KLM, or certainly all the airlines that IAG purchased in Europe, British Airways, Iberia, Vueling, Aer Lingus, you even some of the ones that Lufthansa Swiss was a big success. So I think that's encouraged people to think about consolidation as a solution. Now, obviously, there's always risks with that. There's execution risk, there's regulatory risk, there's financial risk, but it can be a very useful way to, you know, what tends to happen is, when airlines announce that they're going to merge, they tend to talk a lot about like cost synergies and, this is ultimately what happens is you eliminate a competitor. I mean, that's, to a certain differing extents and different transactions, but a lot of times you're just eliminating a competitor. It helps your, your
And
yields
that
and
reminds me of Frontier's statement from a couple of days back that they intend to be a top 20, no, they intend to be a top LCA in top 20 metro areas in US, which basically means that they are out with guns for Spirit, right?
yeah, they've got their knives out there. They want to see Spirit disappear. I remember Frontier on multiple occasions tried to merge or buy Spirit, and they were either rejected or in one case JetBlue outbid them. So they have no friendly feelings towards Spirit. So we'll see. I mean, Spirit. We talked about in our podcast, our most recent podcast. I think I'm not sure if it's out yet, but they're kind of the way I see it. There's kind of four possibilities for Spirit. Either they're gonna merge, they're just gonna disappear, or they'll one option is that they just that they recover. I mean, that things get better. Some people say that the market, is starting to improve. So, that's a possibility. So we'll see. I mean, it's really, hard to know for sure where it goes.
Let's shift our focus to India now, world's third largest domestic aviation market.
And a consolidated market as well, with Air India's mergers. And
Yeah, exactly. Consolidated. And there's a duopoly situation with over 92% or so of the domestic market cornered essentially by two airlines. And a market like ours deserves multiple large carriers, but does not seem to be happening in the near to medium term future. But looking at all of this from your analyst lens, What factors have driven this rapid expansion of the Indian market, according to you, Jay? Of course, there is increased need for mobility and people having higher disposable income, etc., etc. But I'm also keen to know from your experience of observing global markets if these growth patterns compare to anything else you have observed in other emerging markets.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll say a few words about in India and some of the airline developments there. If you go back, it's been about 20 years. About 2005 is when India first started deregulating. Not exactly. There was some steps before then, but I think 2005 is roughly when IndiGo started, give or take a year. A couple of other new airlines sort of entered the scene, and that spurred a lot of domestic growth. There was a lot of turbulence along the way. Jet Airways failed, and Air Sahara wound up. Did they merge with Jet? I can't remember. There was a bunch
Yeah,
of
Kingfisher as
Air.
well.
Sorry,
Kingfisher,
Kingfisher, which was
Air
we always joke
Deccan,
that
so
Air
many.
Deccan. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember all those guys. I was writing about them years ago, and they all kind of disappeared. And India, and it was a very difficult market in part because of this is starting to change, but infrastructure constraints, high taxation. What you're starting to see now, besides the deregulation, is you're starting to see a lot of economic growth. The economy has picked up quite substantially over the past couple of years, and that's really fueling a lot of growth. But I think what's interesting is after the initial wave of deregulation 20 years ago, you did have a lot of domestic growth, and you even had in fits and starts, of course, but you did have generally, a lot of new airlines, new seats, new flights, new markets. You even had some international growth, going to nearby markets like the Gulf markets, like the ASEAN region, Singapore, Malaysia, that kind of thing. What you didn't really see from Indian carriers anyway is a lot of intercontinental growth to Europe, growth to Far East, growth to North America, and the reason why is because the Gulf carriers pretty much were able to grab that market. And so anything you could sort of see a place like Dubai or Doha or Abu Dhabi, they're almost like offshore hubs for India. You can almost think of them as Indian hubs. They're Yep. So what the finally what and Air India was never they were really the only long haul intercontinental airline, and they had so many problems. And they were owned by the government, so their flexibility to invest and their means to invest were limited. So they were never really able to challenge the Gulf carriers. You had Jet Airways that tried, but they ran into all sorts of different problems. They made some strategic errors, whatever. Now you finally have this airline, Indigo, which is seems to be extremely well run, very disciplined, already making a lot of money, absolutely dominates domestic Indian market. They're ordering A350s, they're leasing 787, they're introducing a new business class. So it brings a lot of hope that India can capture some of that market back from the Gulf carriers. But it will be a big fight. And of course, at the same time, you have Air India that's undertaking reforms. Obviously, we had the big accident in June, which is very sad and unfortunate. Hopefully, they can get back on track. But you can see how things are looking at least brighter from the perspective of serving intercontinental markets, more robustly. So you've got the economic growth, you've got the revitalization of these airlines. The one thing that you don't quite have yet, my colleagues at Skift are follow this very closely, and they'd be good to ask about it. And you might know too, Vishal, but India as an inbound tourist market is not very big. And I don't know if it's a priority for government to make it big or whatever, but that's something that is a limiting factor. One,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
At the IATA AGM, the Prime Minister was there. He said all the right things, but to be honest with you, we are not seeing action on the ground yet.
Mhm.
I remember there used to be this fantastic campaign, and I've spoken to so many people on the podcast about this, Jay. We used to have this fantastic inbound tourism campaign called Incredible India.
I remember that. I was living
Yeah,
in China at the time, and they would show that on the
fantastic.
yeah.
And I
Hmm.
don't know why, for what reason, the it's just there's no promotion. And I so much of Indian, tourists which was supposed to come to India is now going to Bali, is now going to
Mm.
Thailand. is now going to Vietnam. And and I feel like we are losing these people for almost ever. I mean, it's just been really badly managed. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's disappointing here. Hopefully they'll get that on track because so much potential, and that would help the airlines too, help the airline markets develop.
You know
Um,
what? The thing is, the airlines haven't, I mean, the airlines would, of course, love more inbound tourists, but the Indian tourist is so strong. I mean, the power of the Indian outbound tourists, those people who are now going to Europe or US or different parts of the world, and then they come back. There is so much of market there itself that the airlines are like, okay, it's all right, even if we don't get foreign tourists. But people who are suffering actually are the hospitality guys, are
yeah,
the five-star hotels, and
right.
somehow they don't seem to have a big voice. But yeah, I think with so much to see in our country, we deserve a beautiful campaign to coach your president. Let's see.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's yeah, it is going back to your earlier question about premium travel. One of the a big driver for that, not the only driver, but big driver was US outbound premium. And there were just so many Americans that were booking first class tickets to Europe, to Japan, to Korea, to uh, just south of Brazil, Argentina, so many, probably some to India, but not that many because it's not a big, tourist destination site. It's more of a family visit type market. But yeah, like that's been a really big benefit to airlines around the world. These American travelers, flying around in premium, and that had a lot to do with the dollar was a big reason. The dollar was very strong, so American consumers, were kind of getting a bargain by vacationing abroad. There was also other factors too. I mean, the stock market has done well. People feeling wealthy. The housing markets and stuff. So job market's been pretty good. So there's been just yeah, just a tremendous amount of outbound demand from the US that airlines around the world have been capturing. Not sure that a whole lot of that has flown to India, but yeah, things do change.
Absolutely. So, but Jay, just coming back to that question, are you seeing patterns? Have you observed similar patterns in any of the other global markets that you're seeing in India right now?
Which patterns
In
specifically?
terms of this enormous traffic, in terms of the rapid expansion that you're seeing in the market, maybe the Chinese market a decade or so back, or some other market that you can think of, and are there any interesting observations for the market?
Understood. Yeah. So, yeah, right. The Chinese market is a good comparison from not today, but from, yeah, 10, 15 years ago, and that was like growing extremely fast. India, interestingly enough, I mean, if you look at IndiGo and Air India, I think they have more aircraft on order than any other airlines in the world. Maybe United might be rivaling that, and a lot of that is replacement in United's case, not growth. The answer is maybe nothing quite like India right now. There are other very ambitious growing markets. Another one that comes to mind is Saudi Arabia. They're starting entire new airlines. They're ordering tremendous amount of new planes from Boeing and Airbus. They're building new tourist destinations. So we'll see where that goes. That is a little bit, I'd say, more speculative. It's more based on I think India's, is more based on economic growth and population size and things like that. But it is extremely interesting some of the things that are happening in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, and sure there are other markets that are growing. I mentioned Vietnam is one where you see a lot of new capacity. Um, but yeah, nothing quite like India right now that come off the top of my head. I think that's especially for such a large market. I mean, if you look at other very large populations, countries with populations, U.S. certainly isn't growing that fast. Brazil is not, certainly not Russia, not China right now. Australia, you can go down the list. It's just, yeah, nothing quite like I'd say sort of India, and then adjacent to that, the Middle East. I think those are probably the two most dynamic regions in terms of aviation, in terms of what's growing. So,
As per the latest DGCA stats, IndiGo now has 65% domestic market share, the world's second fastest growing airline by seat capacity in 2024. We were just discussing them getting wide bodies. They already have a couple of 777s wet leased from Turkish, just secured another 6 months of permit by DGCA on that. They're flying 789s from Norse already, and few more will be joining their wet fleet in the next couple of months. Their own 350s are due in the next 20 to 24 months. How do you assess their strategy and competitive positioning globally, sitting few thousand miles away?
Well, I would call them the most ambitious airline in the world. I mean, if you think about all the planes that they're ordering, if you think about all the new markets that they're entering, all the new strategies they're pursuing, whether it's, launching a loyalty plan, whether it's launching a new business class seat, and, whether it's just growing at I don't know what their most recent, ASK growth is, but a year over year, but is it, I'm sure it's double digits, maybe it's even 20%. So it's it's just the most ambitious airline in the world, probably. I don't think that's too controversial a thing to say. They start from a position where they're already very profitable thanks to their dominance of the domestic market. It's just remarkable, like how they just what kind of share they have, and they really are able to, and that's a very big plus because if you think of an airline that's growing fast in a very speculative manner, without kind of that base of profits, it becomes a lot riskier. So when you're already very profitable and then you start the wide body flying, the intercontinental flying, you're doing it in a much more, you can say, responsible way, or without as much risk. So that is a big plus. I will say though, intercontinental markets are not easy. I mean, they are going to be competing against the big Gulf carriers, which are extremely formidable for a whole bunch of different reasons, ranging from their excellent airports, well-liked service, their government policies and whatnot. So it's not going to be easy. Just the nature of wide body flying. I think there's this idea that wide bodies are, it's easier to make money because you have so many seats, so you can spread your fixed costs over all those seats. You get your unit costs really low, and everybody lives happily ever after. Actually, wide body flying is very, very risky. If you look at the most profitable airlines over the course of 20 years, consistently profitable, the best ones that come up: Copa Airlines in Panama, Ryanair in Ireland. Southwest has had some recent problems, but we still have to put them in that category. These are all, narrow body only, short haul only. So it is,
Very
it's
focused operations.
very focused. It's once you start flying abroad, you get more complex, it gets more competitive. Wide bodies are, just a tougher beast to manage. So that's, it's not going to be intercontinental's not going to be easy for them, but they are pursuing it from a position of strength. So give them credit for that, and let's see where it goes from here. Still just early days.
You mentioned Southwest there, and I will come back to them, but right now I want to talk about another American airline. Your analysis shows every major US airline has lower margins compared to 2019, with one exception, and that is Sun Country Airlines. I'd love to know from you, Jay, what makes Sun Country different, and what can other carriers learn from their approach?
Yeah, so the airline Frontier that we were just talking about, they used to have you're an advertising guy, so you appreciate this. They used to have a marketing line, maybe they still use it, called Frontier, a whole different animal. And the reason why they have that
We
is
used
because
to
they have
have
a
that
different.
animal on the tails as well.
Exactly, exactly. So they're trying to say, we're something different. We're a whole different animal. But really, Sun Country is a whole different animal because they're the kind of airline that it's a very different business model. They have a big cargo operation. They have a big charter operation for sports teams, for casinos, things like that. So it's not really, I always like to include them, of course, because they're a US airline, they're publicly traded, they announce the results, they compete with the other guys in other markets, but they are literally like just a little bit of a different animal. So they are doing very well. They don't have any planes on order, so there's nothing, no issues with delayed aircraft that's messing up their, resource planning, human resource planning, whatever. There's no they're what else can I say? They're very concentrated in one market, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minnesota, which is, very solid middle class economy,
The Twin
huge health.
Cities, right?
Twin Cities, yeah. Huge healthcare sector, which is tends to be very stable over time. Healthcare is like 20% of the economy, and you have like some massive companies based in Minnesota in that sector, like United Healthcare and Medtronics, and I can go on. But so it's like a nice market. Delta's there, they're big there, but they don't bother them too much. They kind of coexist peacefully, and they have like the guy who runs Sun Country, Jude Bricker, is a former Allegiant executive. And so kind of similar model of like only flying the airplanes when they can make money. And it's difficult to do that when you have like newer aircraft, but they use, older ones. And they just do it well. Yeah. I mean, it gets very, very cold in Minneapolis in January. And so, March, February, they'll just fly all day long down to Florida and Las Vegas and, wherever it's warm, California. And then in the summer, they'll switch to, the transcontinental stuff that, peaks in the summer. So they're able to do that and do a nice job with that. So that's, yeah, a very specific, unique example of an airline. But that's their story. Let me just back up and say one more thing since we're talking about the US and um, uh, we can move on to other regions as you wish. But um, if there's one thing I want everybody to know about the US airline industry, because you mentioned that all of them except for Sun Country had lower profit margins so far this year than 2019. The big story above all else is that revenues have increased, yes, but costs have increased a lot more. And that is even when you're comparing to 2019, it's even true of fuel costs. I think I have it in, do I have it in front of me here? If you look at the average fuel cost, just a simple average of what US airlines paid for fuel in the second quarter of 2025, it was $2.36. Well, that number, I guess I don't have in front of me. I think it was 218 in that same quarter of 2019. So fuel costs are actually higher now than they were pre-pandemic. So you take those higher, not a lot, but you take those higher fuel costs, and then you layer on much higher labor costs, much higher airport costs, much higher aircraft, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. You can sort of see why it's been tough. Now, if you're an intercontinental airline with premium traffic, big loyalty program, United, Delta, those guys have been able to grow their revenues almost as much as the cost increases. Whereas if you're Spirit, Frontier, JetBlue, it's been much more of a struggle. Costs have just skyrocketed, gone through the clouds, whereas revenues haven't gone up really that much at all. So that's the one, if there's one takeaway about the US industry that, anybody who's listening should have, that's it.
Are you seeing more consolidation in the American airline sector?
I think it's quite possible because of Spirit's situation for one. And I think there's other airlines that are, strategically challenged, let's say, that might be able to use a deal to address some of those challenges. And, we can go through different scenarios or whatever. I won't bore you with that, but you also have factors like the stock prices. Look at a company like JetBlue, the stock price is so low. So, if you wanted to buy an airline like that, you could. I think financial markets are um, loose enough where if you wanted to raise capital to contribute to buying another airline, you probably could. I mean, whether it be from private equity. I was just, for example, going through the results of Virgin Australia this morning. And they were bankrupt in 2020 during COVID. And an American private equity firm, Bain Capital, came in, rescued them, and they did great. They just IPO'd it. They sold about a quarter of it to Qatar Airways, and it was a good move. So there are some factors that are lining up uh, in a way that make consolidation perhaps possible. But of course, getting deals done can be tough, as JetBlue found out from in the regulatory lane, and as Frontier found out, and just not being able to consummate a deal with Spirit. It's they can be challenging, but I would not be surprised if I'm speaking to you right now, Vishal. I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of airline CEOs are on the phone chatting with each other. But hey, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do that. I don't know. We'll see.
One US airline which has seen a lot of action lately is Southwest. It's a new Southwest now. Elliott is calling a lot of the shots, evidently. The chairman of the new board, till recently, a man very well known in Indian aviation circles, Rakesh Gangwal.
And very well, if I may interject there, very well known by me too, because when I was working for US Airways, he was the president.
I think after the US Airways stint, he joined hands with Rahul Bhatia to start IndiGo.
And he also, a lot of people don't know, he also was involved in United for a time. And he also, this is even lesser known, was very involved in Air France's turnaround as a consultant.
That I did not know indeed. Interesting. Going to read about that later on. But coming back, what we have been seeing from Southwest of late is quite atypical. We're seeing Southwest do code sharing with Iceland Air. They're even planning to fly to Reykjavik. There is an interline agreement now in place with China Airlines, and there is one now with EVA Airways as well.
If they add Starlux, they can get all three.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's going on? Tell us what's going on with Southwest. What's their thinking like?
Yeah, well, Southwest was experiencing some of those same troubles that I mentioned earlier. Their revenues did go up, but their costs just has gone up by so much more. Even if you look at things on a unit cost basis, there's been a lot of trouble because of Boeing aircraft delivery delays. They were really counting on those MAX planes to lower their costs, to increase their efficiency, and to foster more growth. And then what happens when these planes don't arrive? Suddenly you hired all these pilots and flight attendants that, well, what do you do with these people now? The planes are not here. So you start to get into all sorts of inefficiencies, and it really was a big issue for them. And I think Elliott management investors there saw this issue coupled with some maybe controversial non-decisions, let's call them, like not charging for bags and not doing a few other things. And so they pushed management to make those changes after they bought a substantial ownership stake. And a lot of those changes are just starting, but I think frankly many of them are for the better. I think they'll probably do well with the bag charges, distributing through online travel agencies. These are probably things that they should be doing. You could argue that times have changed. Maybe they shouldn't have been doing them 6 years ago before pre-pandemic, and they should be doing them now. So, maybe you don't fault Southwest for pursuing these, non-policies, if you call them. But in any case, they have been adopting an enormous amount of change. And I don't think we're finished yet. Southwest talks about maybe starting lounges. You mentioned that they might even do some of their own intercontinental flights, whether those Maxes can reach Europe from parts of Europe from the Northeast of the United States. They can reach into South America from Florida, for example. You may see some of that, and then will they actually go out and buy wide bodies or Airbus XLRs or who knows? Could they even do something bolder and buy JetBlue? And that would address certain strategic shortcomings like an absence of strength in the Northeast US, for example. So there's a lot of things that we may still see. But already as you just mentioned, there's a whole lot of change going on at Southwest. And they haven't, I mean, just to be very clear with everybody, Southwest, this is nothing like a Spirit situation. It's not that, I mean,
Yeah.
Southwest still has a rock solid balance sheet, which
Absolutely.
means, they have plenty of cash to pay their bills. They have plenty of assets to sell. People lend them money all day, all night long with low interest rate. So there's no question that, about survival or anything like that.
But I
But
have two,
their
sorry,
margins were junky. I mean, like, yeah.
I have 2 points regarding Southwest, Jay. Number one, do you see them acquiring Spirit or even JetBlue for that matter? Do you feel the obvious fleet mismatch might, I don't know, deter them? And number two is I understand that it was probably about time that bag fees came into the picture, and same case with seat allocation. But now they're like any other airline out there, right? There is nothing Southwesty about them anymore. They're losing their moat.
Yeah. I'll address the first question first about the fleet. You're right that, having a mixed Boeing Airbus fleet has some liabilities to that, some cost disadvantages, but it also has some big advantages too. One of them being is that you're just not as dependent on Boeing. Southwest's entire existence depends on Boeing right now, and it's a little bit scary. It is helpful to have some fleet diversification. And so I'm not necessarily sure that's a bad thing to have a mixed fleet. So I wouldn't consider that of huge deterrence, and maybe even an advantage. As far as the culture, yeah, I mean there is that argument that Southwest is kind of losing some of its Southwestiness, I think as you called it, or whatever the term you used. And yeah, I mean I think that's true. It's I think they still can be very Southwest-like in the way their flight attendants approach passengers and the way they, just handle customers in general. Um, at a certain point, if a policy that may be customer friendly is costing you, huge amounts of money at a time when, as I mentioned, you just need more and more and more revenues to catch up with your growing costs, then at some point I think you just you have to kind of bite the bullet and do what you got to do, and just hope that you don't alienate too many passengers. I mean, Southwest is going to have so sure. Southwest, one of their advantages is the reputation they have with customers, the service that they provide. People like them, so people fly them. That's definitely true. But there are other very, very big advantages that they have too that have nothing to do with how they treat their customers. One being just their network, their domestic network is second to none in so many markets. I mean, if you're going from, Kansas City to Phoenix or, Oklahoma City to Austin, Texas, I mean, you could just name these just all these domestic markets that are important to a lot of people. I mean, these are, some of these are, they may not be New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, but there's some of these are pretty big markets, and they provide just really, the excellent schedules with great utility. So that, and a thousand other advantages that they have. So will that, will some of their policies, alienate some customers? Probably. Is that going to break the company or may, I don't think so. I think they get past this. It's important, like I said, for them to continue to distinguish themselves with good customer service on board and on the ground, and when you're on the phone with them. So hopefully they'll continue to do that.
Let's turn our gaze to the Middle East. You've been tracking developments at Riyadh there as they prepare to launch. What are your expectations for their ambitious expansion plans, and how might they impact the Middle East aviation landscape?
Right. So Saudi Arabia is a very exciting market. It's very, we talked about IndiGo's growth, and it's very different in Saudi Arabia because it's just like I said before, it's much more speculative. I mean, this is an airline. You wouldn't do this if your only goal was to make money, to make a return on investment. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of risk with suddenly snapping your fingers and ordering just all this extremely expensive, aircraft, and starting a new market in a very competitive region of the world. However, the goal here is obviously not just making money on day one, or earning a return for private investors. it's very much, tied to a government policy. Clearly, the Saudi Arabian government wants to diversify the economy away from oil dependency. And one way they're doing that is by developing a lot of these service sectors. Aviation is always a really great one to invest in. I mean, it does require tons and tons of cash. If you're a giant oil economy, you have. But it does also provide a lot of, it's great because it's labor intensive. So it provides a lot of jobs, both for skilled people, pilots, engineers, and, look at all the, you know, skilled professionals, aviation professionals coming out of, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. And so it's great for that, but it also provides a lot of unskilled aviation jobs, people working at ticket counters and airports and things like that. So people at airports, um, even just adjacent jobs, people driving vans at the airport, just random things, hotels and everything. So part of the tourism ecosystem, which is very labor intensive. So you can sort of see the rationale. Now, of course, you know, these things can end in tears. We saw that, in Abu Dhabi with Etihad. They just tremendously overinvested. They made some very unwise airline investments and just lost a ton of money that could have been used on schools, hospital, and other things. There's always competing uses for these funds, so you don't want to waste money. Now, is that going to happen in Saudi Arabia? It's hard to say. I mean, I think we're, in early days here in some of the investments. I think Saudi Arabia is trying to attract a lot of tourism. If they can do that, anywhere near to the same successful degree that like Dubai has, for example, that's obviously will be very helpful. You do have, Saudia, which is the established airline. They're growing tremendously fast and ordering tremendous amount of new planes as well. So it is a lot of capacity growth. So just it is very risky that they'll be able to even let alone earning an adequate return, whether they can actually fill those planes and cover the operating costs over time. There's a lot of risk to that, but it's certainly not impossible as we've seen elsewhere in that part of the world. So yeah, we'll have to
Right.
we'll have to see how that transpires.
Looking at your regional analysis for 2025, which markets or airlines are you watching most closely and what trends do you see emerge? I remember you talking about the Indian market and Middle East being the hottest aviation markets right now, not just literally.
Yeah, well, we're always, I mean, I would say for starters, the things we watch most is, what's going on with demand, what's going on with supply, what's going on with cost, everything kind of stems from there. And when I talk about cost, fuel cost is one that's, that's you're almost not quite literally watching it every second, but you're really following, as fuel costs go, so goes the airline industry. It's really shaped a lot by that. So, what are the fuel cost trends? That's just totally like throwing dice in the air. Nobody knows. If I had, if I had a rupee for every time a some smart person on Wall Street said that oil's going up to $200 a barrel, and then they were wrong. I'd be a rich person. So yeah, it's total question mark on oil. But as far as and then of course we don't really know where the economy's going. But certainly a market like India is one to watch because of all the growth there. Will all these aircraft orders. I'm just going to throw out some questions that could shape the next couple of years of aviation randomly off the top of my head. But will all these aircraft orders that Boeing and Airbus currently have, there are a lot of them, will they actually be delivered? Will Saudi have to or Riyadh Air have to cancel their many some of their order book? There's other airlines, even will IndiGo have to Air India have to cancel some of their hundreds and hundreds of orders? I don't know. We don't know. Will, like on the other side of that, at what point does the aircraft shortage start easing? And I think most people will tell you it's not going to happen anytime soon, and we're talking multiple years. You can't get you can't get us certain planes, maybe like a 787-9, you probably can't get one before 2030 unless you're willing to go to a lessor and pay big money. Maybe well into the 2030s at this point. You know, Maxes, A321neos, those are all, just big backlogs. But what happens if there's some big recession or something, a big fuel spike? Suddenly do all these, new aircraft slots free up, and we don't know. So that's the kind of stuff we're watching. And then, yeah, obviously, you go region by region. Um, the big Spirit question we talked about in the U.S., in Europe, big question of consolidation there as well, because there's um, a few kind of lingering airlines like TAP Air Portugal that everybody's wondering, which family are they going to wind up with? Is it going to be Air France KLM? Is it going to be IAG, Lufthansa? So there are questions like that. And then I'll leave you with one more like kind of big broader question is, what is the status of global trade, globalization in general, the flow of goods and people across borders? All of that is kind of in flux right now with the US trade war, with these tariffs that we're pursuing. Nobody really knows where that goes. So that's something that's, could potentially shape the next few years of aviation. And it could even be to the point where the US gets left behind because they're left out of different trading relationships. I mean, that is a possibility. So, that's something I've got my eye on as well. And I'm sure, we could talk about a million other things because there's always so much going on, but I'll leave you with that.
I want to talk about AI for a second. Artificial intelligence is now increasingly being adopted by different airlines for revenue management and dynamic pricing. How significantly do you think AI will reshape airline ops and consumer experience? I guess CX will be the low hanging fruit and already being done widely to some degree. But what about other aspects like pricing and revenue?
Like I said before, not too much yet. I think there's a lot of attention being paid to it, but it's more real it's more talk at this point than it is well, I shouldn't say that. It's more than just talk. It's real investment. It's people, I'm sure there's some, new products getting introduced, new services. I'm sure airlines are using it in ways like, predictive maintenance for, their aircraft operations and maybe their online chatbots on their website to help with customers. I'm sure there's different uses that are actually already in effect, but is it making a meaningful impact on, airline earnings, the airline experience for customers? I don't think so now. I haven't seen it yet. I'm still waiting. So, will I see it next year? Maybe. I mean, things are changing fast and, there's certainly an enormous amounts of investment in AI. So maybe we'll see something. But, a lot of what shapes the aviation experience and aviation success or failure is, happens with, not so much software, but, you know, big capitally, things you can touch like aircraft and, concrete things like that. And, how much is AI going to, change the nature of aircraft design? Maybe long term it probably could, but is it going to I think we know which kind of aircraft we're going to have for the next 10 years more or less, um, things like that. So I don't really see AI having a like massively revolutionary impact, but I am always ready to be proven wrong because you never know what technology can come from nowhere. So,
That
but
reminds
yeah,
me.
I'm giving you a long answer, but basically, it's I don't think it's made a huge impact yet.
Let's talk airline economics, Jay. Your approach focuses heavily on the question, how do you make money in this industry, right? What's your current assessment of the airline business and the sustainability of the model?
And the airline business, it's an extremely difficult one, in part because it's very, very labor intensive and it's very, very capital intensive. So you need a lot of money to buy these, giant aircraft, complicated aircraft, and you just need a lot of labor to fly them and to operate everything you need to do on the ground in the air. So that just makes it inherently very, very difficult. And then you introduce a lot of government policies and politics, and it just becomes difficult to make money over time. If in a good year, the airline industry collectively will maybe make us, I don't know, 7 or 8% operating margin. Whereas other industries you can find that do a lot better than that. So it is a difficult industry. Now you can make more money selling things to airlines or leasing things to airlines. That's probably the better business. But airlines themselves, yeah, are very tough. So, is that ever going to change? We have seen over time that the industry has become less labor intensive for sure through technology. A good example of that is, when they introduced airport kiosks and you didn't need as many people working at the airport counters. Or when you had, people buying tickets over the websites and then you didn't need as many travel agents or, airline reservation agents. So it is a less labor intensive industry than it has been in the past. And there's certainly potential to make it less so with AI. And we'll see where that goes in the future. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, of course it is for, people who, there's always people who might lose their jobs because, I was a travel agent now, or I was an airline, ticket counter person, and I don't have my job anymore. That's always, one of the rough realities about, economics, I guess. But, if you can have a robust airline industry that's thriving, that's growing, that's hopefully even becoming cleaner in terms of its emissions. If we can, achieve all that, even if it's with less labor, that's ultimately going to, provide employment, more employment throughout the whole economy. I mean, aviation is just a very good thing for jobs in general, even if they're not hiring the people directly always. So that's just an aside of saying that we could see, the airline industry becoming in some ways less labor intensive. And then, aircraft will continue to get gradually more economic. The 787s of today are much more efficient than the 767s of yesterday, which are much more efficient than the A300s from the generation prior. So that's always very helpful too. But yeah, there's on the other hand, I mean, yes, the airline business is very difficult to make money, but it's also a business that a lot of other people depend on, and a lot of other companies and governments and other
Right,
stakeholders depend on. So,
right,
we're always going to have an airline industry.
right. I'm sure as hell hope so.
I hope so.
Um,
Or
let,
else I'm going to be the one
let's
looking for a job.
let's take out your crystal ball, Jay. Okay. Imagine this is 2030, 5 years down the line.
Hold on, let me grab it here. Okay, I got it.
Right, there it is. I can see it. It's nice
Mhm.
and big and colorful. All right. Where do you think the global airline industry, how the industry would be 5 years from now in terms of market structure, in terms of passenger experience? What are your notes there?
Yeah, I'd say for one thing that's important to realize is that the airline business, let's say airline traffic, has consistently grown faster than the economy, faster than GDP for half a century now. That just hasn't changed. And periodically you'll have these shocks that will cause a contraction for 1 year, 2 years. Obviously, COVID was one of those shocks. In the past, it might have been, terrorism or war or so, whatever it might be, earthquakes. You always have disruptions, but the long-term trend is definitely up. So I don't have any doubt that 2030, assuming no shock that particular year, the airline industry will be bigger than it is today. So that's just a very simple I can see that very clearly in my crystal ball. Obviously, aircraft will get more efficient as I mentioned. There will be more of the latest and greatest airplanes, 787s replacing older 777s, whatever. Neos replacing COs and Maxes replacing NGs. So we'll get more efficiency that way. But I also can tell you by 2030, because of the long lead times in aircraft development, we're not really going to see anything too revolutionary yet in terms of aircraft technology. I mean, maybe between now and 2030, someone announces some, radical new aviation design that, you know, totally changes the game in terms of airline economics. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. But even if that does happen, um, it would take many, many years. I mean, a good example is, I know there's a company in the United States called Boom Supersonic that I should mention my colleagues Seth and Sarah actually interviewed the CEO of Boom. I would recommend that. I actually haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. I certainly will, but it's I'm sure an interesting discussion about what they're doing. But even if I mean, they say they're on track to debut a new supersonic aircraft, and maybe before 2030, let's call it 28, 29. Even if they do achieve that, big question mark. But even if they do that, um, we're still only talking about a very small number of aircraft in the whole scheme of things up, in the beginning. Maybe 15 years from then, 20 years from now, it'll catch on and have more resonance and more. But in that sense, there won't be a whole ton of change. Now, as we, to go back our previous discussion, will AI completely change the way, I board an airplane or I buy a ticket, or what price I'm charged? I don't know. My guess is no, because I just think some of those things are, how do you change those things? But maybe I'm not. How do you change those things radically? But maybe I'm just not using my imagination enough. But maybe my crystal ball is just it's a dull crystal ball. But yeah, those are just some thoughts in re response to your question. Um, there will be growth, but I don't foresee any kind of,
Got it.
radical reshaping of how the world flies. Let's put it that
Right.
way.
And my last question to you. If you had one strategic recommendation, one, for India's Ministry of Civil Aviation to unlock the next phase of aviation growth for the country, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say uh, I think it's important for government policymakers to very clearly define their goals. So if your country decides that we want to use aviation as a tool for economic development, and that's a little bit easier to do in a place like Dubai, where it's pretty small. I mean, you're basically a city state. Your constituencies are rather limited in terms of who you have to answer to. Um, then that's you would pursue certain policies for that. You would want to keep aviation taxes low or whatever. But there are um, competing goals, of course, as well. I mean, and a good example of that is, do you want as an Indian regulator, do you want India's airports to be as busy as they possibly could be? Or do you want India's airlines to be as successful as they possibly could be? Those are two different questions. Because if you're shooting for growth, then you want to open the floodgates and let Emirates come in and fly all day long to Delhi, to Mumbai, whereas, if you're prioritizing the financial health and success of IndiGo, of Air India, of some of the smaller airlines like Akasa, well, then you might want to have more of a protective shield.
Which is happening right now. But if you were in Mocha's shoes, Ministry of Civil Aviation, what would you prioritize first, airlines or airports?
Yeah, you're putting me in the shoes of an Indian political politician here. So not easy to say. I mean, obviously, I am partial for prioritizing growth and not the airline itself, because the airline itself, for an economy, I don't care who it is, if it's one airline or the other. But of course, you do want a healthy domestic airline industry. You don't want to be dependent on foreign companies for your entire economy. I think India is maturing. The airline industry and the economy is maturing to the point where it can have both. I think it can prioritize both. So, without having, giving this too much thought, but I'll just nowadays we're just, we're allowed to just throw our opinions out without thinking too much. I think that's I won't be the first to do this here, but I think my opinion off the cuff would be to prioritize growth period. Get as many people flying into and out of India as possible. If it's on Emirates, fine. If it's on Etihad, fine. If it's on United Airlines, fine. If it's on IndiGo, that's good too. And then I think that competition will only help Air India, IndiGo get better. And I think that everybody in the end can win. So that would be, if you gun to my head, I would say that would be my advice, is to prioritize, maximize the number of passengers that you're bringing in, and that'll really stimulate your economy. And you got to do that by, you got to be careful about providing. You got to provide a lot of infrastructure, which India has done a good job in building new airports. You also have to, make sure your aviation charges aren't too high, et cetera, et cetera. So,
What a conversation. So insightful. I'm now a fan, Jay.
it was my pleasure, Vishal. I hope we can talk again.
And did I tell you that Jay co hosts one of my favorite podcasts with Gordon Smith, the Airline Weekly Lounge? Next Sunday, the Indian Ad Geek returns, and it returns with some energy. Rohan Mehta, the founder and CEO of FCB Connect, will be on the show. And the week after that, the big 50th episode of the Indian Av Geek. As usual, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode of the Indian Av Geek with your fellow Av Geeks. Jay is not on X, but hey, I am at Vishal1 Mehra. Always happy to have your feedback. With that, keep your tray tables up, your seatbelts fastened. I wish you well, and happy flying, my friends!